exciting Wednesday here at Podetize. And this is our weekly coaching call. Tracy's going to be joining me shortly, so stay tuned for that. She's just arriving a little late from another meeting she had to finish, and then she'll join me for today's discussion topic. And this will be a good one that should be relevant to pretty much everybody out there who's watching or listening. Recorded as an episode, and then we'll have our normal Q&A discussion after that. So while I'm waiting for Tracy to join, I thought I would share some information, talk about a little bit of current event. There's some articles that are talking about podcasting, obviously still growing as a market, growing strong, but that ad revenue has declined a little bit in the podcast industry. Now, really only, and they're talking about conventional ads with like large brands that want to put ads on podcasting, or if you've ever listened to ads on, if you use a Spotify app and there's an ad, if you're not paying for a Spotify paid account, then you get served some ads very often before, when you click to play a podcast, you'll get some ads before you listen to the podcast. Same thing with listening to music on their platform. You get some ads before you start to hear the music. And that's how Spotify tries to get you to get a paid account to remove the ads from the equation. Those are the kind of ads. Most podcasters, in our experience, are not monetizing with sponsors in that same way, and not in the sort of what I would call programmatic ad space. They're monetizing in other ways, but definitely what we're seeing is a decline in ad revenue in general in podcasting, but that's due to the economy more than anything, and just a decline in ad spend from sponsors overall. Really, I don't believe has anything to do with podcasting or the merits or benefits of advertising on podcasting. And now Tracy's here. Tracy, are you hearing me? I was just sharing a little current event with everybody while I was waiting for you to join, and I'm going to pause briefly to move the dog away from whatever she's barking at, so that I don't get that as we record. So,
well, I finally got her out of my office because she was begging me for food.
Well, thanks for that. Now she's
now she's with you. So there you go. Well, did anyone ask any questions? Do we have some questions already? Is that what Tom was addressing? I don't know. I joined in a little late. Sorry. I've been jumping from call to call to call today. So, but happy to be here with you. And we're excited to talk about this topic. We think it's a really great topic. So this is,
it is a good topic. I think it's going to be good for everybody. Cody put it in the chat there.
Cody, could you drop it in again? Cause I joined a minute late.
Oh, you joined late?
Yeah.
Just drop it.
I just want to make sure I get the title right. So,
oh, I've got the title, but
yeah, I don't have it. So I just want to make sure. Okay, great. Yeah. I mean, it's just we're hearing a lot more about more and more people choosing solo episodes, and I think we should talk about it. So that's why we're going to address this today.
Yes. And it's often a question I get with new podcasters is, some of them have already decided before they come to us, yes, I want to have guests on my show. I don't just want to do it myself. Others have more to share with the world that's just their own thoughts, and they're like, do I really want to have guests? And I think, there's some good things to talk about here.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, then let's get started.
All righty. Welcome back to Feed Your Brand. I'm Tom Hazzard, along with my co-host Tracy Hazzard, and today we are going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of solo and topic-driven podcast episodes. This is a really good subject to cover, Tracy, and I think the vast majority of our listeners will be interested in this, or they certainly should be, I think.
Right. Well, I do want to address it is that the time where you are, or the point at which you are in your podcast, also makes a difference here. So we're going to segregate the two pieces, like within your first 50 episodes and 50 or more. I'm going to say anything higher than that, right? because in your first year of podcasting, and I'm going to assume you're at least doing weekly. If you're doing 50 episodes in 2 months, awesome for you. Great for you. That's okay too. It still applies. That's why I kind of put the number at 50 episodes, right? Because it doesn't matter if you speed it up and do them more compressed, it's still 50 episodes and it's still a tipping point for things because of how many episodes you've had, how many people have promoted and what you've done. So there's an advantage to having guests in your first 50 episodes that may have diminishing returns later, but is significantly powerful in the growth of your show at the starting point. And so I do want to make that differentiation here. And so if you're in that starting place, consider maybe a little more weighted on the guest episode side. And if you're past that starting point, we're going to look at stats. We're going to talk about some other things, but the topic may be coming up for you, or time for you to test out topic episodes.
And Tracy, I just want to emphasize the advantage of, and the sort of one of the good reasons why you're suggesting in those first 50, you might want to have guests is really selfishly for you, the podcaster, isn't it? It's more so that, I think, than it is for your listeners, right?
Well, I mean, it's exposure to listeners. So at the end of the day, if your voice is being heard and your message is being received, then the listeners are benefiting. They're more likely to get access to you through somebody else recommending you, through somebody else being a part of that, through that somebody else sharing your show.
Right.
And the more likely you are to get somebody to share your show in a larger quantity is to have somebody who's guesting on your show who's willing to promote it, right? So that's where the advantage lies. So if you're trying to grow an audience from nothing, which is where all of us start when we start a brand new show, we start at nothing, then one of the big advantages to having guests on your show is the power of other people's audiences. That's what we call it when we talk about it, OPA. So other people's money, you may have heard that before, right? In investing, other people's audiences, their audiences is valuable. Now, the key is to make that a match to you, because just going for somebody with a big audience doesn't always pay off if it's not in your niche or if it's not the right type of audience. So if you've got high-end consulting advice and you need CEOs of corporations and other things like that, and you've got some kind of, entrepreneurial, like startup audience because of the guests you have, that might not be a great match for you. So really thinking about in those early days, if I have guests on my show, the best advantage for me is that audience growth, and right fit matters most.
Right. Whose show might you, what host might you have on as a guest? You probably want to think about who's their audience, and is my message a fit for their audience too, right?
Right. Right. So that's why we say that that's really powerful. Now, there are certain cases where that's not the purpose of your show. The purpose of your show, like our purpose of our show here for Feed Your Brand, is to provide value first and foremost to our clients, to our existing client base. And on the outside of that, if we attract new through that process because we're adding value or providing some information that's useful to them, and then they decide to come and do business with us, that's great. But aligning ourselves with outside people who don't have the same direction, who might give confusing messages, who are trying to sell them something else, is not in our best interest. So we do not take guests here on Feed Your Brand. There's a whole nother show for that. It's called The Binge Factor, right? I take guests over there, but we separated it and we only have episodes here. But we didn't have to worry about growing a listener base because we had all of you clients out there who were coming into our calls, who are live streaming with us, who are on Zoom, who are enjoying the conversation and the Q&A sessions that come after it. That was our first and foremost. So the decision, because of its purpose, was to do solo episodes, or in our case, co-host episodes.
Well, co-host, but it's still a non-guest episode, a topic-based podcast. We come, with a topic we want to share and discuss. But you're right. It is first and foremost supporting our existing community, and they get it first, right? Our existing customers get it first, get it live, and they're able to ask questions after, whereas the rest of the world has it weeks or a month later when it comes out as a podcast, and that serves them too. Sure, that's great, but it's definitely topic based, and you really have to be, I think, comfortable. And I know, you're probably thinking we're going to get to this in a minute, Tracy, but you have to be really comfortable getting on a microphone and just speaking as if you're even at an event speaking from the stage. It's kind of a rhetorical situation, right? Where you're just have some important message in mind you want to share, some wisdom, some nugget, a story, whatever it is. You have to be comfortable speaking. And occasionally, Tracy, you and I are not always able to do this together. And we keep up the pace, showing up for our community. And either one or the other of us will do this alone. But then it's always more fun for us, I think, doing it together.
I agree. But I think that there's a situation by which when Tom and I first started our very first podcast in 3D printing, WTFFF, which stands for Fused Filament Fabrication, a geeky term for 3D printing.
Very geeky.
Yeah, really geeky. We did 5 days a week. We had one guest and 4 topics. And we rotated the topics. We had Business Mondays, Tech Tuesdays. I didn't always do the tech ones. Tom did them alone sometimes. We'd have Educator Wednesdays. So it was focused on sort of teaching 3D printing or anything that an educator might be interested in from a topic. Then on Thursdays, we had our guest. And on Fridays, we would go over a fun project we were going to try over the weekend, or we recommended trying over the weekend. So we had this kind of rotating format of topics. And it worked out really great for us because it got us to test what topics were playing and where we could go with it, and what resonated the most to everyone. And so between having that, we had the best of both worlds. We had guests helping to promote it and grow our audience, and we had topics which were really what the audience was there for. They were really there for what we had to share with them, but the guest was helping us promote it out. And actually, it became interesting, new tools, new technology, new businesses that people didn't know about. We were able to expose that. So it was really, and we didn't do it in an affiliate model. We did it in a straight, like, hey, we're curious. Is this worth something? Is this worth exploring? And we would be exploring along with the audience. And so they loved it. And that format for us worked really great. And we did it that way for almost a year. And within that year, we reached 100,000 listeners a month. And we could not have done it if we hadn't have done that mix of both. And the topics got listened to more, but the guest episodes got us new listeners who then would binge on all the other shows. That's what worked for us. So this is why I say there's an advantages and disadvantages to it. It could have been bad. We could have been associated with products and companies we didn't want to be associated with. And that could have harmed our brand. But in our particular case, our brand was about seeking new ideas, seeking new information. It worked out great for us. So you've got to make that choice for yourself and for your purpose, your ultimate purpose of your podcast. And then say, is there a way for me to do this in a way that feels genuine to me and is worthwhile? And so I point this podcast many, many, many times, the Charisma Quotient, one of my favorite podcasts, Kimmy Seltzer. She's an absolute amazing podcaster. She does a great show. One of the things that's powerful for her is to be associated with other coaches. So there's an authority raise that happens. So once a week, she does a debate, and that's what I'm going to call it. It's like they pick a topic and the 2 coaches talk about it from their perspectives. So she's kept tight control over it so that other coach, even though they might be a competing style coach, or, they're selling them something else, right? They're selling their coaching services and she's selling coaching services, that they could be competing, at least competing for dollars, if not for the particular type of coaching, right? They're not, because they're sitting there debating a topic, talking about something that's of value, something that's of interest to her community. And she keeps tight control over that. And the way she builds that episode is brilliant. So definitely go and listen to that when she's got a guest on. Listen to those types of episodes. But that might be the way you go and approach it, where you're now getting your authority side by side with someone you need to be in the marketplace with. And it's okay if you are not presenting yourself as in full endorsement agreement, because you set it up in a way that doesn't require that.
I think that's a fantastic example. I know that show, and that's a good one. People definitely should check it out. But Tracy, one of the things that I find people often say to me, especially new podcasters, when they're thinking about their topics, is how am I ever going to come up with something to talk about every week? I mean, they actually feel that that's a daunting task.
Well, first off, I don't think you need to think it through to the nth degree that you figure out an entire year's worth of episodes. You can,
True.
but I don't think you need to, right? You need to feel that it can be narrow but deep, right?
Right.
And that's okay, right? 3D printing, very narrow, but deep in terms of all the different things we could talk about. We could talk about filament, we could talk about metal, we could talk about software, we could talk about hardware, we could talk about teaching it. There's so many things that we could
Sure.
talk about in that we knew we could go for a while. I never in my wildest dreams imagined we could talk about 3D printing for 650 episodes. Just never thought that was going to happen. But it did, because it built off of it, because the more we did, the more people asked questions, the more things that came up for us. It feeds itself. I mean, seriously, Tom, I don't even know. We're well over 200 episodes in Future Brand. I have no idea where we are with this.
Yeah, we actually pretty recently just hit over 200.
Yeah, we just hit over 200 episodes. I mean, we don't repeat, because I don't do that.
Well,
I mean, we might repeat it, but
take
about a different tact on it, take
Right.
a different view on it, right?
I agree.
We don't really repeat our stuff. It's not redundant for us. It's new and exciting for us when we talk about it.
And
I guarantee you, we've
something fun
talked
to talk
about
Mhm.
topics before, but we never talked about comparing and making a decision between topics and guest.
Sure. No, we didn't. And we didn't hey, we got to have some guests because we need something new to talk about, right? We haven't really done that.
Right.
But I would say this though, there are things that you and I certainly feel strongly about, that we believe in, that I know we've repeated ourselves emphasizing those things
within an episode. Absolutely.
But within a different context usually, or there's a good reason why it comes up again, but it's not like repeating a specific topic. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, look, we have a whole training that we do, that we've done it many, many times. I think I did it pretty recently. We just had a master class on it. And we'll make sure in the show notes for this episode that there's the master class link if you would like to take that again. But we really did a workshop for clients on topics. And so I update it about once a year, maybe twice a year, where we just sit there and brainstorm and try to work through your own sticking points on brainstorming topic ideas and where do they come from and how do they do it. But we really have a process here. I think I dropped into our work chat that we have going on for everybody. I dropped into the chat 2 topic ideas for coming up into April, because we're that far out in our planning already for the topics that are going to come up. And sometimes it happens on a call with a client. And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. And I just immediately jot it down by sending it to a team member. I put it out there so that we all have it. And then once a month we meet and we go through and we make sure we've got our topics planned for a month ahead, because the way our social media works, the way our planning for all of you is our client base works, we need to have it so that we can orchestrate a really good title, make sure you're interested in it, make sure everybody knows about it. But I'd say almost all of them come from an interaction with someone who asked us a good question, comes from a question that gets posed because of something we read that's going on in the marketplace, patterns that we see of things that shift, that changes all the time.
And the biggest contributor to topics recently is experiences that I have auditing existing podcasts. People who are already podcasting, and we offer a free audit of your show. So people don't always know, hey, am I doing this right? Am I getting everything I should out of the show? How do I compare to my competition in my niche? People don't often know. And so we audit shows, and I see some of the biggest mistakes people are making, especially rookie errors for new podcasts, things like that. Those have provided some good topics and reminders for people, or for us to talk about, to our community.
Well, and because I live in a point of curiosity all the time, when I'm doing my binge factor episodes and I'm doing my interviews always there, I'm asking questions of what was the biggest challenge for you, and why what do other podcasters ask you about? And so I'm also probing that at all times to get to great topic ideas. And I got one this week that I was interviewing a podcast manager who manages more of like a meetup group, more of like a community. And she said that the number one question she hears from people who haven't gotten started podcasting is, how do I get my show up and published as a podcast? And I was like, like syndication is like second nature to us. Like, it's like, and my backup to that is, why should you have to know how to do it? But we've done a junk job. I'm trying not to swear on air here. We did a junk job of, as a hosting company, all of us, if we've made it sound difficult, right?
If that is still difficult, sure.
Right? The industry as a whole, all those hosting companies, if we've made it sound complicated, then we've done a bad job. And so that says, we need an education piece on this. We need an episode on this. We need to really talk about this so that this isn't something that's holding you back from getting your show launched.
I agree. Yeah, I think sometimes because at Podetize, we do it for you. You don't have to think about it. We think, what does it
Everybody
matter
knows
how
that.
you have to do it? But you're right. I mean, I think it's important people know, heck, if you want to do it yourself, by all means. But I think there's probably better things for you to do with your time, like recording another podcast episode, and not worrying about the nitty-gritty technical details of how to make sure it's on every app.
Right. But my point to this is that if you're generating topics completely in your perspective and completely closed model, then you're not asking the right people, the people who need you next, who need, those people who don't understand that they even need you yet. Like, those are the people you need to be asking the questions of. And when you do that, your topics are just going to flow open for you when you realize stuff that is second nature to you are the things that people really want to hear. That's going to open up all these topics you didn't imagine. Another one of Tom's and my favorite places to go for topics is Answer the Public. Love Answer the Public. Because it presents it in such a visual way, number one, but it's like, how to do this, why I should do that, when to do this. Like, it makes you think about the topic in a much more
from a lot of different
way.
Perspectives too, really. Yeah. Right. It actually can be overwhelming how much information you get back from them. But if you look at the way it's presented in some of the different perspectives, it helps you think about these things in a different way.
And from what I would say is a much more simplistic perspective. Mm-hmm. And that can really, like, by simplifying it down for yourself, breaking it into the basics, it starts to force your thinking in a different model. Mm-hmm. So, but I think the biggest and most important part to all of this is thinking about those advantages and disadvantages to creating topics and or guests is, again, making sure that they're aligned with what the audience needs to hear and what they want to hear. Because a lot of times you mistake the two things, right? They think they want this, they're wrong, and they really need that. How do we bridge that gap? It doesn't come from telling them they need this, right? It comes from giving them what they want and then helping them see why the other option is a better path, right? So if, in my example that I just gave before, if they really want to know how to get their show published, instead of me sitting back going, you don't need that, let me teach them why they don't need that.
Sure. I think that always helps to
give them what they want and then show them why they don't need it, right? Mm-hmm. That's a way to approach it. So be thinking about those things. So let's talk about what happens after you hit a certain point, after that 50 episode mark or 100 episode mark, whatever it is for you. You may feel like you need more than 50 pieces of content in that starter, or you want a bigger audience, you want to double the size of it. So maybe you want to go to 100 episodes or whatever that is. But at that point, you want to start looking at your statistics, not from a discouraging way that, like, I'm not getting the downloads I want. I don't want you looking at it. It's not the scale. Tom and I talk about that. You're not getting on the scale every day. We want you to look at it from a trending pattern. Are specific type of topics coming up If you haven't done any topic episodes, start adding them in once a month and see what happens to your numbers. Do those get double the amount of listens to the guest ones? What's going on with that? That could give you some indicators that your audience is ready for topics if all you've been doing is guests. Or go the other way. If all you've been doing is topics, bring in a guest now and then. See what's going to happen and start to mix it up in that second set of 50 or second set of 100, and really start to mix that up and start seeing is a patterning going on? And then when you get to another 50 or another batch of them where you feel like it's statistically significant, right? It's really hard to tell if you only do this for like 1 month, make changes. It's the change has a boost of its own. You need to see if it settles in and keeps going. And if every single topic episode, month over month, if you did 3 guests and 1 topic, and every single one has higher percentage of listens and or playthrough, really matters, playthrough, then we definitely want to start saying, I'm onto something. Let's see if I do this more. Let me do 2 a month. Let me split it and see what happens. What you want to make sure is that what's not happening is that your listener growth curve, because it's like I'm going to say it's like a slight angle as it's going up and up and up. And you should see small amounts of percentage of growth every single month in your listener base. And if you're not seeing that, if all of a sudden it flattens, then you have to have a mix of guests in. And that if that's the case, we recommend 4 episodes of topics and 4 episodes of guests. So you're actually doubling your episodes for the month, which seems like a lot of work, but you can do the topic ones could be under 10 minutes. They don't have to be super long. So you can balance it out and make it pretty easy on yourself. But if you do that, now you're keeping the best of, I need the growth still. And I've got these topics that are resonating, keeping people coming, and they're probably leading to clients.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tracy. The topic ones I find pretty easy to record. And, sitting down for a couple hours and bang out, 4, 5, 6 of them is pretty easy. It's the guest episodes that take more planning and really do take more time. So
you can also do what we do is live stream them. So if you want to every Monday get on and live stream for 10 minutes and give your topic, now you also have put it into your sort of your standard process for the week. You've put it into an expectation. So you show up, you get it done. It's all a part of the process, and you're live streaming it. So you're exposing yourself out to the LinkedIn community or wherever you're live streaming to, just like we are here. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We're in all those places at once, right? And that helps us with our marketing for the week and creates these great topics and provides value to our client base. So we've managed to cover everything we need to do and still make sure we're getting our topics in.
So Tracy, I've got a question for you because you listen to a huge amount of podcasts. What do you prefer listening to? Solo casts or guest interview episodes? Do you have a preference?
I do, actually. So,
and I'm curious because I haven't asked you this before. I have a preference too. I'm interested in hearing what yours is. And by the way, folks, this is not a plant. We haven't talked about this ahead of time. I really want your candid answer.
Yeah. And you know what? This is the thing. Look, I don't want to offend anyone who's out there. I'm proud of you all. I'm proud of you all for going out there and becoming podcasters. It's a really hard job, but I don't like interviews as much as I like topics, because for 2 reasons. One is most people are not good interviewers. And so because they're not great interviewers, the guest runs all over them. And they give sound bites or the same answers you hear everybody everywhere else. And anyone who's a professional guest, you can tell, and they're just giving the same stuff everywhere. And I get really bored with that personally. Now, if it's a great interviewer, and I have a few that I absolutely love, and I would listen to them anywhere. Veronica Dagger, one of my favorite interviews. She's got, and she's got a Women in Wealth and a podcast, and it is just a fantastic show, but she's a Wall Street Journal journalist. She knows how to interview people. And she interviewed some people who were like the hardest guests. I would have faltered. And I've done over 3,000 interviews. I would have faltered with some of the guests she had on, and she pulls out a great story. That's skill. So I can listen to it if it's really skilled, but because of that. But too often I hear a little bite of something you've got a perspective on and you've got an opinion on as you're setting up a question or as you're doing something, but I want more. So that's the thing that I think when you start to do enough episodes and you hear people say, I'd like a topic or I'd like to hear from you, that's why, because you're giving them enough to intrigue them, but not enough to get them to buy from you, to get them to binge every episode. So they're still picking and choosing based on the guests they like or don't like, or the topics they think they like that the guest is going to cover, but they really want you. And so until you start bringing in some of those topic episodes, you don't know. But it's the number one thing I hear of someone who reaches over 100 episodes. It's like, I did topic episodes and all of a sudden my listening spiked. Or I did topic episodes and all of a sudden I got more clients. Like, what the heck? Well, yeah, duh.
Yeah,
because they really wanted you.
I tell new podcasters this a lot, especially if their intent is, oh, I just want to interview people. I don't want to speak alone on the microphone. Well, and there's a way that you can still have guest episodes, interview episodes, discussions, whatever you want to call it. And they're not all the same, by the way. Those things happen in different kinds of podcast episodes in different ways. It's not just one way to do it. But I tell them, your listeners don't just want you to be a conduit to the guest. They want to know what you think, and you need to give that to them. So you can do that within an episode if you want to, within a guest episode. But having dedicated solo cast episodes that would be shorter, narrow topics is another really good way to do that. And you're just showing an example, Tracy, or we're talking about an example of where you can actually get a boost from that. Can be very helpful. And I think that's very true.
So what's yours?
So interestingly, I also really, for the podcasts that I have listened to the most, don't have guests. That is true. Now, I similar to you, there are some really people that really do a good job interviewing others. And I'm a fan of, in terms of podcasting in general, having guest interview strategy for your podcast. I mean, it's incredibly valuable. I think oftentimes more to you, the podcaster, than to the guest, especially if you're not as skilled an interviewer. But I like solo casts, especially somebody who is really comfortable speaking on a topic and sharing their wisdom. And especially if they do it in a way where they're, telling a story, an example, a case study, something based in some reality as a means to then communicate the topic that they're trying to. And one of my favorite podcasts that I used to listen to all the time and would binge when we drive to Las Vegas, I'd load up my phone with episodes and just listen back to back, no longer exists because unfortunately the host was taken down by the SEC and his company went out of business. But that's unfortunate. But he was a really good speaker
because he told great stories, right? And
yes.
and you could understand how that concept applied to it. Well, really, and look, this is why we grow to love our podcast hosts, right? Aaron Young and I became best friends. I mean, I consider him my big brother.
Right. Oh, we're very tight with Aaron over, gosh, how many years we've known him now? 8 years or something. Yeah. Wonderful. But yeah, I remember when
I listened to his podcast first and it was these folksy stories that I had no concept about. Like I didn't grow up on a farm or anything like that. And he would tell these stories about baby goats and, other things, but it was the way he told a story and the lesson that you got out of that fascinated me. And I basically wanted to be his friend, and then happened to be listening at an event to this MC who told another baby goat story. And I was like, how many people there are? And I went on, this is how old it was, went on my iPod to look at the show that had been downloaded to my iPod where I listened to my podcast. And I was like, oh, Aaron Scott Young. It was called The Lookout back then. It's now called Unshackled or Unshackled, right?
Well, it's a different podcast.
Yeah,
now,
it's a different podcast now. Yeah. But back then, and I was like, I walked up to him like a fangirl and said, I've been listening to your podcast and I love this story. And it wasn't until you just told that right now that I made the connection that you're the same host that I binged on my whole drive to this event. And
which
then
is
we
just
became
unbelievable,
best
really.
friends, right?
Yeah. It was the beginning of a journey
Yeah.
in business and then in friendship, and it's a wonderful thing. So I'll talk about the power of a podcast, folks. There's a good little story right there. And I hear stories like that from others. It's, especially when they get out into the world, they go to events and, they know you. They have heard
I've
you
been
on a
to events where
podcast.
they take pictures. They were like, "Can I take a picture? I need to send it to a friend to say that I met you." Like, and I was like, "What?" Like, that's just weird. But
I'm
it
just a
does happen
podcaster.
because your advice had a ripple of effect for them. But if
Yeah.
you're not giving them those topics, you're not giving them your perspectives, you're not sharing those things in that process, you're also not serving your audience in a way that they need, right? They want
Right.
both.
And then since I shared sort of my favorite type, and like I said, look, I listen to podcasts of both types, interview, guest episodes, and solo casts. I tend to like the solo casts better, especially when it's a good speaker and they tell a good story. But there are people that tell great stories in interviews. But I think I want to share the ones that I dislike the most. And you alluded to maybe one of these things, and I'm not going to call anyone out because that's just not who I am. I don't want to trash anybody on the podcast, and try to, hurt anybody. But podcasts that are very formulaic, and I've been a guest on some where they ask the exact same questions to every single guest, and especially the ones that are shorter, really short, like 7 minutes, 10 minutes, and it's just the same. I mean, really,
It's a funnel machine and everybody knows it.
It's a funnel machine, and I don't think it really provides enough value. It leaves listeners wanting more, and you're really communicating as a host if you do that kind of show, that you don't care enough to spend some time and to have a meaningful, deep conversation and to provide more value. You're basically leaning on your guest to provide all the value. And in that case, as a host, you're, what I said earlier in this episode, you're nothing more than a conduit to the guest. And then it's kind of random for that show. Is this guest good? Have something good to say? Does this guest not? You're sort of, it's random whether you're getting value out of that show or not. So anyway, that's the kind I dislike the most. And I won't do them. I won't be a guest on them anymore.
No, I think they're disrespectful to your audience if they're not done properly. And look, I've seen short shows and I get it. That's okay. If it's, like I always say, marketers have the attention span of a gnat. So if you're going to do a show on marketing, like don't expect them to listen for a long time. So it's okay to make it short, but maybe you want to be respectful of the guest and break it into pieces if that's what you want to do, because you're not being respectful to your guest, getting to know them enough to be able to build a relationship with them. And that's part of the amazing part about having guest interviews, right? Is getting this beautiful network going. And if you do 7 minutes, 10 minutes, it's not enough.
No.
And so you don't get that. It's just a production machine for publicity, and they know it, you know it. It's just, and no relationship gets built that way. So it's also then coming through to the audience in that formulaic machine type way. And I guarantee you there's probably not a lot of binge listening going on in those shows.
No.
You're picking and choosing in case if you're listening at all.
Yeah, you're probably surgically looking at the topic or the guest. Which ones do I want to listen to? These other ones, yeah. I mean, I'm not interested in.
But I am a fan of taking them apart and using them in social media, like using short clips and doing all those things. But build a relationship, have a good, decent interview, even if some of it ends up on the cutting room floor.
Absolutely.
Or in the social media only pile.
I mean,
right?
to me,
your show.
That's part of the fun of podcasting, is having that conversation. It's actually part of why I enjoy doing the podcast audits, because I get to meet so many different people, look at their podcast, learn about it, and provide them some value for free, whether they're, gonna work with us or not. I'm providing them some value for free. Hopefully that builds some credibility, and either they're a good fit to work with us or they're not. But they may send someone else because, hey, you know what? You might want to talk to those folks. So anyway, it's
Yeah.
about
I mean, look,
serving first,
I
right?
love interviewing. So like,
Mhm.
I mean, I could say I don't like listening to them, but I love interviewing. And probably that's part of the effect of it, because I love interviewing. When the host doesn't ask the question that I want to hear the answer to, I'm more critical of it. And that's just my personal
Mhm.
listening pleasure. It has nothing to do with it. I highly value guest interviews for all of you out there. This is a podcast builder for you. So guest topic, maybe both, depends on where you are in your podcasting journey, but think them through and think through what's right for you, what's right for your audience, and what's right for the stage of your podcast at this moment in time.
Boy, that last part, I always want to put a little emphasis on, Tracy, at this moment in time. Everybody, ding, ding, ding. Seriously,
You
listen
can make
to
a
that,
different choice tomorrow.
because you really can pivot. It may work for you for a time, and then either if you're not feeling it, you need to, change it up to keep it interesting and fun for you, or you're responding to, what those analytics you're tracking. Like Tracy said, don't stand on the scale every day, but month over month or quarter after quarter, and you see, hey, I'm flatlining a little bit. Look, you absolutely can pivot. And gosh, we've each done that multiple times on our shows, Tracy, and don't be afraid to do that. So it's just,
and I've recently interviewed a few people who pivoted and then pivoted right back because it wasn't working for them. And they realized relatively quickly, within a couple of months, it wasn't for them. And it wasn't even so much that it wasn't working out. It just didn't fit their style, and they lost their excitement for their podcast. So you can always make a different choice. Your audience is going to come along with you. Don't worry about that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Tracy, I think that's a great place to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. We'll be back next time with hopefully another engaging topic for you.
Oh, no hope. We're going to have it, right? Because we got this topic stuff down.
You're right. I really don't know why I said hope, because I don't believe in hope in these situations. I really don't. That's always my mantra. Hope is not a strategy. We definitely are more strategic in this. So
we will have another great topic for you next week.
Have another great topic for you. All right. Until then, thanks so much for listening, everybody. This has been Tom and Tracy Hazzard on Feed Your Brand.
Sorry to poke at you on that one, but you say it a lot.
No, but you know what? That's one of those moments that makes it real, and people enjoy about listening to us. And we've heard that over the years. And when there's banter between us, sometimes
I know people like that. That's why. And so, that is the case. I mean, part of what we like is we do like the perspectives, and that's why we co-host our topics. But, and I wasn't going to join today because I had a lot going on and my morning got like all compounded, but I'm so glad I was able to make it.
But you know what?
One of my favorite topics.
And this made a much better one with both of us here. I mean, I would have done it alone, but it wouldn't have been as good. And I have no problem admitting
we have fun. We have fun
only
doing
one
it.
Perspective then, right? And so, hey, Sarah Hussman, wonderful to
I saw it
here live. And for those of you watching out on social on the live stream, if you're, poditize customers in any way, you can be here live in the webinar and then participate and comment, which is happening here, and ask questions now at this point. And actually, Sarah posted some nice little memory, Tracy, if you
I'll tell the story again. So
you'll tell. Okay,
she said I shared a story about getting an interview with John Travolta, which is actually, that's right, and how he gave the exact same answer. So I was offered an opportunity at an event to be one of like 3 or 4 people who interviewed John Travolta and some other celebrities, but on a red carpet. And so we had like 3 to 5 minutes, like total. Like it was like really
every celebrity was like, okay,
3 minutes,
next microphone, move to the next microphone, and like this parade of celebrities across this 3 or 4
I was like one of the only online. I'm an online columnist for Inc. magazine, and I thought it was weird. Like, why would John Travolta want to be interviewed in Inc. magazine on a column written about innovation? Like, I just didn't understand that, but I was like, they asked me, and I don't know. I was kind of a Grease girl. Yeah. Like,
you were like a fangirl starstruck.
Yeah.
Like,
and my dad gave me my dad was just teasing me about interviewing Vinnie Barbarino. So, cause that's what we grew up with. And I'm dating myself, but that's he still sees him that way. I took my dad to see Phenomena, and all he could think about was like, it was, Welcome Back, Kotter. Like, he's like, I can't even look at him and see him that way. It's like, it doesn't work. Anyway. So he's really tall, like there's like the whole thing. And so I'm kind of like, ooh, here he is. He's right next to me. And I go through, start my questions. And he gives me these odd answers that sounded kind of rehearsed. Like I don't, and so that was my
He's
first
an
indication.
actor. Is that a
Right.
surprise?
So then because
Unfortunately.
I am an experienced interviewer, even at that time, and that was a few years ago, I was like trying to switch it up and get him to like give me something original and give me something good. So I started asking him about flying and 3D printing because I thought maybe he would have heard about that because it was going on in a lot of remote airports. He had no idea what 3D printing was.
But you knew he was a pilot, right?
He was a pilot, and
planes.
all of a sudden he engaged on, and I saw this like light go off, and he was just like you could see something different happen in him, but I didn't have the right kind of question there that I was going to work, and then he was ready to move on. So I pulled together from what I did, wrote my article, had a quote, or I think at least one, maybe two quotes from him in the article. I set it to publish, I don't know, like on a Thursday or something like that of the week. And that day was on an interview with the guy from Inc. Radio, who had also been the next guy in line who interviewed right after me. And he played a clip. At that same time, I got a text message from our friend Cheryl Staff Connor, who wrote an article for Entrepreneur Magazine that morning, and she was the other one on the red carpet. And so I read her article, and I was like, his quote is exactly my quote. And then I'm on the radio show, and they play the sound clip, and it's the exact same quote. And so now I'm about to be the third in a row, which would be duplicate content, and my Inc. editor would be furious at me. I mean, if I'd published first, I would have been smarter, but I didn't publish. I had scheduled it for my usual time. And so he said the exact same thing to all three of us, which is why it sounded so weird, because it wasn't really an answer to my question. And it was like some weird thing about how entrepreneurs take too much risk. Like it was just, that was kind of thing. And what I realized is that he was just really over prepared by someone because he wasn't comfortable giving real answers, being authentic. And so it was this lesson to me that I'm going to have to pull this out. So I pulled my story, I rewrote it. I still used the picture of us in the headline. So it looked like it was about John Travolta, but it really wasn't. And I used quotes from some other people who I talked to, and including John Paul. Oh, Paul Mitchell. What's his last name? I can't think of anyway, he was the creator of Paul Mitchell.
Okay.
And he gave me some of the coolest things, like the coolest stories. He told me a story about how he went from bar to bar eating peanuts off the bar food, peanuts and pretzels and whatever was in a bar, with all his hair products in the trunk of his car, and he couldn't afford dinner. So he'd get the cheapest drink he could, an iced tea or something like that, eat some bar food, and then go on and move to the next sales stuff. And that's how he made his business go. Like that was his dedication. That's a great story, right?
Yeah.
Better than a soundbite. And I didn't have to work that hard to get that out of him. So that's what actually made it in the article at the end of the day. But I'm glad I at that point, when I heard that repeated soundbite, said, And that's the problem with formulate questions. And that's the problem with these guests that serial guest everywhere, right?
Well, and
don't really tell new stories.
That's really the problem with what the book industry and entrepreneurship is doing, trying to convince everyone they need to have their own book. And then when they have a book, if you do have any publicity, you have any kind of marketing for the book that you're doing, they'll have you go on as many podcasts as possible, but these people say the same thing over and over and over on every
because they're
podcast.
hawking the book, right? And that's what they're being trained to do. And that's the thing is, you'll sell more books if I like you.
Yep. Hey, Tracy, we got a question. Do you like having a key question or a special question you always ask folks? Now, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sarah. And I do have key questions. I do have some things that I always cover, but I never ask the question the exact same way. And that's the key. So I do want to know on the binge factor, I want to know what their biggest return on investment from their podcast has been. And so I'm really trying to get at the monetization or the what's the high payout for them, right? So sometimes I ask for it, like, hey, how are you monetizing your show? And sometimes I say, what's been the biggest return on investment for you? Or what was the most surprising return on investment for you? Biggest intangible. So I'm always asking about it in a roundabout way, but it usually spurs the conversation to giving me the full story. And so I never ask it exactly the same way, but I am trying to get that perspective. And then I will always ask another question. And that's usually about, if people come up to you and ask you for advice on starting a podcast, what do you say? Or what advice do you have for our audience who hasn't started their podcast yet? Like, so I ask it in different ways, but I'm also asking for startup advice, for monetization advice, right? And so I'm getting at those two concepts, but just not in the same way.
Now, Sarah, to add to that, while I'm not a fan of the formulaic interview, style where every single episode asks the same questions, and most of them ask, when they do that, do it in the same order every time. While I'm not a fan of that, there are many shows that do have, at some point in the episode, usually later on in the episode, have a familiar either key question or 3 key questions or a rapid fire 5 questions or some little segment that repeats, that is something for the audience to look forward to, because there's a different guest every time. Maybe they have a different story, but the audience can get conditioned to be like, well, I don't know what they're going to say throughout this whole interview, but I really want to hear what they say during that segment. So if
that's why I'm not a fan,
you're known
Tom,
for,
I'm not a fan of the rapid fire 5 because they tend to be inconsequential.
Like
a lot of times they're like
so.
not, like, who's your favorite superhero, and like, things like that. Like, and they don't seem to have a great reference to your topic. If they have a great reference to your topic, then do it.
Sure. Well, but there can be good ways, though, to use that in different ways. I mean, you may not use it in your podcast. Even it could just be something that you get some social media sound bites out of, or a little clip out of,
right? And we do that
on social.
We recommend that a lot.
So there's that opportunity. But there's, I find, and this is not going to be a podcast example, but I find that a good example of somebody that does this well is actually Stephen Colbert, where he has his normal show format every night, and he'll have guests and interview them questions. And they're promoting something. But what he'll do once in a while with certain guests is he has what he calls the Colbert questionnaire, which is some of the same questions asking like a celebrity, but he'll use it in a future episode, usually when a guest has canceled and they need to fill some time or something. But it's sort of a different way to provide a little bit different kind of value and experience to the listener. It can change things up a little. But
I'm going to say, so there used to be, when we had physical magazines, and I know, Sarah, you probably remember these teen magazines, and they would have the little sideboard that got to like talking about like what their favorite teacher was and what their favorite food is. And like they do it at the baseball game. Like we were at the Angel Stadium and they pop them up on the screen. Those kind of things that personalize someone, especially when your subject matter is always so serious, or always about real estate, or always about something, like bringing in some of that personal aspect can be a really good thing. I'm just not a fan of doing it when it seems like irrelevant or inconsequential. If it's getting me to know somebody better and like personalizing them, great. And or if it's tips that are going to really help my audience even better, I love that too, right? Especially if you've got a show that is really like we, having a show where the whole purpose of the binge factor is for you to listen to their show. So my job isn't to get you it's to intrigue you enough about the show for you to go check it out, not for me to get you to love the host on my show. That's not going to happen. So I don't need to do the personalization, but I do need to get them to give you some advice that is going to be useful to you. And so if I can draw that out of them, it's better.
But if you can turn it into a segment, if it's tips or something,
thank you.
If it's tips, you can definitely, have a recurring segment that people look forward to. and keeps them listening through the episode to get there. Something. So not every show is a good fit for that, but I like the idea of, I like some shows that do that.
So, Cody, I can't remember the name of the show. It's, oh God, it's going to come to me, but it's, I think I wrote it down, right? It's, because I just interviewed somebody who was talking about it and raving about it. And, the three comedians who Smartless. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was like, what's the name of the show?
Yeah.
Smartless. Like, their model for doing it is so good.
It's really good. And they have had someone, Melissa McCarthy. This is a good example of a guest who comes prepped with her interview questions, because she had the exact same answers as she did on Dax Shepard's podcast. Same emotions, same stories, nothing really different. And then she was on another podcast, and I'm like, oh my goodness, Melissa McCarthy, you are not prepared to tell stories. You do the same thing over and over and over again. It's a
Which
little
shocks
sad to
me.
hear.
She should be
It's
great at
super
improv.
shocking. Yeah. But it's a good episode. But their podcast, the way they handle theirs is really good. It's one of my favorites.
Right. And you really can't go into theirs over prepared, because they're gonna like throw things at you. And so part of their model is one of them picks the guest, the others don't know about it. So it's kind of a surprise to them who they're bringing on. So they're not prepared.
Wow.
So that has its own, I'm going to say its own
dynamic
to it.
Yeah.
That really changes things up.
Yeah. And they really play on the fact that they're not experts in any field whatsoever. So that's why the show is called Smartless. They don't come ready with smart questions either. So it's a fun thing that they do. Sean Hayes, Jason Bateman, and Will Arnett. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
Jason Bateman's fantastic. I like him.
Yeah. So anyway, this is just where, the kind of model that there's lots of models out there that are that can help you figure out ways to handle interviews in a different way, but they're worthy of doing. Like, I hope that we got that across to you. They're worthy of doing, and they have a place. They may not be what you're going to do all the time, and they might not be the long-term strategy for your show. They might be the starter strategy, and that's okay too. So, well, we'll be here next week. What's next week? Let's see.
I don't remember.
What is next week? We're already in March next
March
week.
1st.
Oh my goodness.
The topic.
Holding you back from getting started.
What's holding you back from starting your podcast? Cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
So that's a little starter episode, starter people, which are our clients though. What's holding you back from keeping going is also something. It's going to end up in the topic as well. So
I think it will too.
Yeah.
And with so many people in permanent potential, if they just get things out of their way, get out of their own way, they would be benefiting. Yes.
Yep. So we're going to cover that topic next week.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you next week.